In the next few days and weeks, Israel will be carrying out retaliatory attacks on Iran in response to Iranian missile attacks 2 weeks ago. Now, in deciding on exactly how they're going to respond to the Iranian attacks, the Israelis face a very serious dilemma. In this video, I am going to address how it is that I think the Israelis are going to address this dilemma and what the consequences are going to be for global financial markets. Let's review the dilemma that Israel faces in deciding on exactly how it is that they're going to retaliate against Iran. On one side of this dilemma, Israel currently has the best opportunity, the best strategic opening that it has ever had to deal with its existential enemy, Iran, on favorable terms. But the most compelling issue is that this may be the last opportunity that Israel has to confront Iran while Israel still possesses the strategic upper hand. Because within a matter of weeks, months, or at most a year, Iran will most likely acquire a nuclear weapon. And when that happens, Israel will no longer have the strategic upper hand in a conflict between the two. So if there is going to be a war or a conflict between Iran and Israel, from Israel's point of view, they want that conflict to happen now while they still have the strategic upper hand. Therefore, from Israel's perspective, that response that they want to have right now is to have a very, very decisive response where they defeat Iran militarily and, in fact, try to effect regime change. These are the stated goals of many Israeli leaders: to defeat Iran militarily, what they call the head of the snake, the one that's financing a whole terror network that has engulfed Israel, and in addition to even affect regime change, because many Israelis realize that as long as this Islamic regime is in charge of the government of Iran, it will remain Israel's existential enemy forever. And Iran is a country with 100 million population and that has reach throughout the Middle East. And so with the passage of time, this regime poses an existential threat to Israel. And with each passing year, the threat is even greater. So right now, Israel, at least according to many of its leaders, needs to take advantage of this historical moment to deal with their existential enemy. The other side of this dilemma from Israel's perspective is that they depend on the support of the United States and of the international community, or at least a very important portion of the international community, because they can't actually defeat Iran, or at least not decisively by themselves. They're going to depend on military and economic support from the United States and other allies. And they're going to depend on a certain amount of at least sympathy from a lot of the major powers around the world. The problem is that right now, the United States does not want a major regional war breaking out in the Middle East. Why? Because this would most likely cause a spike in oil prices. And right before a presidential election, the Democratic administration doesn't want a spike in oil prices because that could ruin the chances of Kamala Harris winning the presidency. Now, there are other reasons why the United States would like to avoid a regional war if possible, because since the United States is committed to Israel's defense, that would actually drag the United States into this war, exposing American lives. So there's a number of reasons why the United States doesn't want a regional war to break out. Therefore, the United States has been trying through various channels very aggressively to try to tone down Israel's retaliatory strikes against Iran in order to avoid a large-scale, all-out war between Israel and Iran, at least at this particular time. Now, a lot of Israeli leaders, as I pointed out earlier, want to aggressively respond to Iran. They want to go directly after Iran's nuclear facilities. They want to go after Iran's economic infrastructure, and that means primarily their oil industry, in order to set Iran back 20 or 30 years economically so that they don't have the cash to finance terrorism. They don't have the cash to finance their war machine, and also to try to destabilize their regime and possibly bring about regime change. But the Biden administration doesn't want this magnitude of a conflict at this particular time. So they've been trying to persuade the Israelis through various means to tone down their response. The Israelis are going to have to decide, are we going to go ahead with our strategic plans or that are in accordance with our national interest at this particular time, or are we going to let ourselves be influenced by the United States? That's sort of the dilemma that the Israelis face at this particular time. So how is Israel going to respond to this dilemma? Now, we have to keep in mind what Israel's primary objectives are. Their first and most important objective is to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. This is Israel's end game. They're not going to let this end game from sight. Regardless of what happens, this is the end game as far as Israel is concerned. They're not going to let this conflict end until they have taken out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Now, the second major objective that the Israelis have is to try to affect regime change, or at the very least to debilitate this regime so severely that they no longer pose an existential threat to Israel. These are Israel's two main objectives. Now, the Israelis also, as I mentioned before, need to take into account the United States' point of view on this situation, because they're going to depend on support from the United States. So I think that the way that they're going to resolve this dilemma is by first choosing to concentrate their attacks on Iran's military infrastructure. Very, very severe, comprehensive attacks on Iran's military infrastructure. This is very smart. Why? Because by trying to take out their military infrastructure and their military leadership and their command and control centers, this is going to very much degrade Iran's capacity to mount a counterstrike. A counterstrike on the part of Iran towards Israel could be extremely dangerous, because Iran possesses thousands of missiles, and they possess the capability of launching 1,000 or more missiles at any one given point in time. And that could actually overwhelm Israel's aerial defenses. And so Israel, it's very much in their interest to try to severely degrade Iran's military capabilities. So I believe that the first round of retaliatory strikes on the part of Israel is going to be entirely focused on Iran's military infrastructure. They're not going to go after Iran's oil facilities, and they're not going to go after the nuclear facilities. They're going to do this in a way to say to Joe Biden and the Democratic administration, okay, we're playing ball with you guys. We went along with your requests. But in the end, we have to remember what the end game is here. The Israelis understand that if they attack Iran's military infrastructure extremely severely, this is going to elicit necessarily a major response on the part of Iran. And so Iran is going to respond to the Israelis. And after that, there's going to be a counter response by the Israelis. And in that second round is probably where they'll go after either the oil facilities or the nuclear facilities, or both. Or we may just be in another round where they may not hit the nuclear facilities or the oil facilities until a third or fourth round of attacks, when they feel that they are completely justified in doing so, and when they have the American support of the American administration. In fact, right after the U.S. election, I believe that Israel is going to have the green light. First of all, they know that Donald Trump has already stated that he is fully in support of Iran going after Iran's nuclear facilities. First and foremost, according to former President Trump, if he was Israel, he would go after Iran's nuclear capabilities first and then worry about the rest later. That's the way he put it. Now, if it's the Democratic administration that wins. Once the election is over and they've won, they no longer have to have the incentive to try to restrain Israel as much, and they may not actually be able to do so. Israel may try to essentially put off the bulk of the attack until after the election in order to gain favor. Because essentially what will be happening here is say, look, we're going to put this off. But if Iran continues to attack us, we're going to go after their nuclear facilities. But that won't be until after the election. And I think that at that point, the Democratic administration is going to be somewhat beholden to the Israelis, saying, hey, thanks a lot for not having attacked during the election. We're going to repay that loyalty by going ahead and supporting you in taking out Iran's nuclear facilities. I think that this is the way that the Israelis are going to resolve this dilemma, by simply focusing an absolutely ferocious attack on Israel, on Iran's military infrastructure, degrading their capacity to respond in a way that could really, really threaten Israel. And then in 1 or 2 rounds of counterstrikes in the future, that's where Israel is finally going to go after Iran's nuclear facilities. And when they're really going to try to go for the jugular, which is to try to go about effecting some sort of regime change through, I think, some very spectacular plans that the Israelis have, and that are going to be revealed to the world over time. What I specifically mean is that I believe that the Israelis have established a vast infrastructure of agents throughout Iran that are going to be activated and are going to be actively committing acts of sabotage against the political infrastructure, against the economic infrastructure of Iran, and helping to foment revolution there. And I think those plans are going to be fully put in place at some point in the next few months, but perhaps not until after the U.S. elections. Now, let's talk about what this all means for U.S. financial markets. Now, today we saw that oil prices dropped when there was a news report coming out of the Washington Post that Netanyahu supposedly has agreed to not strike at Iran's nuclear facilities or their oil facilities in a concession to Joe Biden, who's been trying to restrain Netanyahu. Oil prices dropped based on that news. This is very short-sighted because, again, I really want all of you to focus on what the end game is here from Israel's perspective. They can afford to wait a few weeks until after the election, but make no mistake, Israel's leaders are not going to stop this conflict until they have taken out Iran's nuclear capability and until they have massively degraded Iran's military capabilities and their economic capabilities to continue to mount this terrorist war that they've been mounting directly and through their proxies in the region. So this conflict is not by any means going to be over after this first round of strikes against Iran, even though they don't strike their oil infrastructure or their nuclear infrastructure. This is just going to be the first step, because the attacks against Iran's military infrastructure are going to be so incredibly severe that Iran will be forced to respond with all its might. And it's going to be after that response that Israel is going to eventually go after these nuclear facilities. Now, the other thing that the market is really completely losing sight of is that Iran has one big ace card. It's really two big ace cards, but I'm just going to talk about the one big ace card right now, which is that they can try to persuade the international community to get Israel to cease its attacks on Iran, to get Israel to not attack their nuclear facilities or their oil facilities by blocking passage of oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. By doing that, just for a few days, oil prices will shoot up well over $100. And if they could do it for a few weeks, they're going to shoot up over $200. And if they could do it for over a month or two, we're going to have oil prices at $300. Iran very much has the military capability to block passage of all oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And if they do it for a prolonged period of time, it would cause oil prices to spike to perhaps $300 a barrel, that would cause massive global inflation and massive global recession. At that point, with all of this economic pain being felt around the world, there's going to be tremendous pressure on Israel to end its war against Iran. That's the trump card that Iran possesses. And I believe that they're going to probably need to resort to that trump card pretty soon in this conflict. Because if I'm correct, that Israel is going to be dealing a massive blow against Iran's military, Iran is going to soon realize that they're going to lose this war, because they're not just fighting against Israel, they're fighting against the United States, essentially. And they will be defeated decisively in this conflict. And it's existential for them, because the Iranian regime could actually be overthrown as a result of losing this war. So from the point of view of the Iranian regime, they shouldn't wait to pull this trump card a few months from now when they're already at the edge of defeat. They need to pull that trump card out pretty soon in order to try to build international pressure against Israel and the United States to halt the war against Iran. The market is completely blind to this risk at this point. The market is simply hoping that this war is going to amount to nothing. But as I said, if you really focus on what the end game is here from the point of view of Israel, Israel's end game, and I don't think they're going to be deterred at all, but under any circumstances, they will not be deterred. They're going to be going after Iran's nuclear capabilities, and that means all-out war. And so even if it doesn't happen the next month before the election, it's going to happen right after the elections. And that's what the market doesn't see right now. They think that after Israel's next strike, the war might be over. Not at all. Because even if Israel is very successful in its next strike, even if the Iranians don't respond, this isn't the end of the road for the Israelis. They want to get rid of Iran's nuclear capabilities, and they want to get rid of Iran's military capabilities. They want to end Iran's support for their terror network, which poses an existential threat against Israel. Because we have to remember that a large portion of Israel's population has been displaced from the north of Israel as a result of the missiles and explosives that have been fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel. Israel knows that this is the future that they face. If they don't destroy Hezbollah now, if they don't destroy Iran now, those missiles that made life impossible for Israelis that lived in northern Israel, those same missiles are going to be raining down into central Israel and all over Israel within a very short period of time, making life impossible for Israelis. So Israelis know that they have to address this issue now. They can't wait for years. They can't wait for a diplomatic solution. They're going to have to decisively defeat their enemy. And what I believe that they're going to do, which I think is smart, is that they're going to go ahead and play ball with the current administration just in case Kamala Harris wins. And that way they'll win the support of the American administration when they finally do go after the nuclear facilities. And Israel also know that if Trump wins, they're probably going to count on his full support on striking an absolutely existential blow against the Iranian regime. So how do you capitalize on this as an investor? I have two services. I have one service on Seeking Alpha, which is a little bit more of a conservative service. And then I have a very aggressive service, both of which I'm linking to right here. I show you exactly what it is that I do in both portfolios. And I encourage you to take a look, to have a free trial, take a look at these services. And what I do, I reveal entirely my strategic thinking about how I go about placing my positions. You'll learn a lot from it. I guarantee you that. And you'll also be getting constant updates throughout the day regarding my strategic thinking on this issue, but more importantly, my thinking about how to take advantage of this in the market. It's going to be very tricky because the timing of these events are extremely uncertain. This conflict could explode and cause a massive market decline just in the next few days, or this is something that could actually play itself out over the course of several weeks and months. So strategically kind of playing this smartly is going to be very, very important. And if you want to see how it is that I'm approaching it and how I'm doing it, I have two different services that I want you to take a look at in the links. In addition, I want you to subscribe to this service because I'm going to be providing regular updates on my views on this conflict and on the impact on the global economy and financial markets in the next few weeks. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and we'll see you next time. Thank you.